this, I would say, is an excellent opportunity to meet our new Commissioner. So it is my privilege to introduce to you the European Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law, and, of course, Consumer Protection. Please welcome Commissioner Michael McGrath. Thanks a lot, Commissioner, for hosting this summit. Glad you could join us here today. I know that among many other responsibilities, you and your team, you're working hard in preparing the upcoming Consumer Agenda 2025-2030. I am convinced that our audience obviously is very keen to discover the priorities from your mandate, especially when it comes to consumer protection. So I would invite you to engage in a cozy discussion on those priorities, on those topics, together with the Director for Consumers at DG Just, Ms. Isabelle Perignon.
Good morning, Commissioner. Welcome to your first Consumer Summit. We are at the beginning of your mandate. You are responsible for consumer policy, and the world is changing around us. In these very challenging times, how do you see the place of consumer policy?
Well, good morning, Isabelle, and good morning to all of you, and thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. It's a really impressive turnout, and my gratitude goes to Isabelle, you and your team in the DG, and all of our colleagues who assisted in organising this excellent event. So I hope we'll have a really productive day where we can discuss the twin issues that are highlighted really on the theme. It is about protecting consumers, but also the issue of European competitiveness is front and centre of the agenda, and I think the two can work hand in hand. So wonderful to be here. Look forward to all of our discussions. I think to your question, Isabelle, I think Nils touched on some unavoidable issues for consumers at the moment. Many of them are, I think, deeply concerned about issues like the cost of living, which has increased very significantly. If you think about the costs that consumers really can't avoid, their accommodation costs, energy costs, basic food and drink items, all of which have gone up very significantly over the last number of years. And that's the backdrop. And so people are looking for value for money. And that is why they will try to source the best priced product or service that they can find. And that is why we have to help our European businesses to be competitive in that environment as well. But we're facing many challenges, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get into them in a moment in the context of the explosion of e-commerce, which I think is here to stay, but it raises real issues, both for consumers and also on the question of the level playing field that we seek to achieve for European businesses. Product safety is a real concern. In the context of the number of products coming into the European Union that simply do not meet minimum EU product safety standards. That is not acceptable. And there should be a very clear message going out from this summit today that only products that are safe, that meet minimum EU safety standards are welcome in the European Union, and we have to work together to step up our enforcement activity and ensure that we give effect to that objective, which is also the legal position, because there are very clear legal obligations in that respect. So consumer protection, working towards the new consumer agenda and the action plan, protecting consumers online, including children, is going to be a key priority across this mandate as well. But I want to thank all of the stakeholders, and a particular shout out to the ECC network for 20 years of service to consumers all over the European Union. Your work is deeply appreciated. I think we do all share a common objective, whether you be working with a ministry in a member state, working with the Commission, working with a national authority, or indeed working with one of the European consumer centres. We all share the same objective. And to be fair, the overwhelming majority of businesses that are based in Europe, and many of those selling into Europe as well, respect our consumer protection laws, and that should also be acknowledged because they recognise it's in their interests to protect European consumers.
Thank you. The Commission recently published the 2025 Consumer Conditions Scoreboard. What are your main takeaways?
There's a lot of food for thought in the Conditions Scoreboard. On a positive note, it's good to see a relatively high level of trust among consumers that what they buy is generally safe. They feel protected in that sense, and they also feel that their consumer rights are being upheld. So it's around 70%. So I think that's a good starting point. It could be better, and I think the reason why it could be better is because there are too many examples where consumer protection laws are not respected, and where unsafe products do come into the European Union or are sold from within the European Union, and those are issues that we need to work together to address. I think the scoreboard also highlighted the challenges around the cost of living. And when you look at the level of inflation that we have experienced over the last number of years, coming out of COVID-19, supply chains were disrupted, significant impact there. And then, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the immediate and severe impact that had on energy prices throughout Europe, and indeed on many other important staple items that people cannot avoid purchasing in their day-to-day lives. So that's a real issue as well, which was highlighted in the scoreboard. And the scoreboard also, I think, reaffirmed the trend, which is very clear for all to see, and that is the dramatic growth of e-commerce, with the vast majority of consumers now engaging in shopping online. And that trend, I think, is irreversible, though for many the retail experience on the high street is important and is irreplaceable in many ways, but for convenience and for speed and for various reasons, more and more people are doing at least some of their shopping online, and that creates issues around sustainability, sustainable consumption. It also raises issues, of course, around protecting consumer rights in an online environment, given that in the main, the suite of consumer protection law that we have in the European Union was not designed specifically with this age in mind. And that is why hopefully we will come on to talk about the Digital Fairness Act proposal, which is about addressing gaps in legislation, not about placing any additional layer of regulation on many businesses that already feel overburdened, but where there are gaps and where we have the evidence that those gaps are there, I think we are duty bound to seek to close them.
Yeah, you already mentioned several priorities, but what are really the three main priorities for you that you want to achieve during your mandate?
Well, the first one is to get the overall strategy right, and we have just commenced the public consultation for the consumer agenda and the action plan for consumers in the single market. So please have your say. It has just gone live and it will remain open for, I think, is it 3 months, Isabelle? About 3 months? About 12 weeks. So there's plenty of opportunity for people to have your say. And please, use all of your own platforms, social media and so on, to try to engage ordinary consumers as well, in addition to the important stakeholders who are represented here. So that will be a priority, getting the strategy right, because that will set the template and the framework for all of the work that we do in the area of consumer protection for the remainder of the mandate, essentially to the end of this decade. The second priority is around enforcement. We do have a strong body of EU law and national law to protect consumers, but I think it's unquestionable that we have to step up our enforcement of consumer protection law, and that involves working together more effectively more efficiently, ensuring that we coordinate our work, so the national consumer protection authorities coordinated through the CPC network, through the work, Isabelle, of you and your team, and also on product safety, the work of the market surveillance authorities across the member states, coordinated through the consumer safety network. We need to do more with the tools we have to protect European consumers and to protect legitimate European businesses that are complying with the rules. I also think that we do have to have a reflection on whether we need to reform the CPC regulation. As a new commissioner, it doesn't look to me to be an optimum design, that you have 27 different authorities. Let's take the example of consumer protection, having to work together to coordinate action, which can take on average about a year and a half, at a time when many of the breaches are systemic in nature, are inherently cross-border, and are at a threshold which is very significant. And I think there is a case to be made for the Commission having investigative and enforcement powers centrally in respect of certain breaches, not all breaches, but certain significant cross-border systemic breaches that impact on European consumers across the 27 countries. So we are undertaking that internal reflection, which may lead to a revision of the CPC regulation, but there's further work to be done on that. The third one then would be the Digital Fairness Act, which is the flagship initiative that President von der Leyen has asked me to deliver with my team in the DG and in the Cabinet, in relation to protecting consumers in an online environment, and again with the focus on any gaps that remain and using evidence and having a solid basis for the decisions that we take. And so we will take our time because we need to get this right, and we will commence the public consultation shortly, and there is over 12 months work involved in developing a fully thought out, considered proposal in this space, dealing with consumer protection online, but also protection of children in the online environment, including in the context of video games with certain features such as gambling and in-app purchases and loot boxes and so on. And I think it's well documented the areas that we will be focusing on through the fitness check, including addictive design, unfair personalization practices, the difficulty we all experience in ending subscriptions online. Very easy to click to sign up, but very difficult at times to end them. So the role of social media influencers, the need for full transparency. If there's a commercial transaction underpinning the promotion of a product or service, I think consumers should have that information and factor that into their decision making. So that, I think, would be a third priority.
Thank you so much. We'll be very happy to work on this with you. You were before Minister for Finance in the government of Ireland, and also previously the Minister for Public Expenditure, as well as an elected member of the Cork County Council. All of this before coming to Brussels. So what lessons from this experience do you want to bring with you when you came here?
Well, the nature of Irish politics is that public representatives are very close to the people that they represent, because we are directly elected. So at all levels, local level and national level, you're on the ballot paper and you're in a multi-seat constituency. So it's highly competitive. So you have to remain very connected with the communities and the people that you represent. And you actually deal with a lot of individual cases, not just as a councillor, but also as a member of parliament and indeed as a minister. You still do constituency work, and so you're very in tune with the issues that arise. And given the two portfolios I had in the Irish government, a lot of the focus was on financial services, given the nature of the brief that I had responsibility for. So consumer protection, in the area of banking, of mortgages, for example, other financial products that consumers would be acquiring. And we did a lot of work to develop a national financial literacy strategy, which I think is important, that we equip consumers with the tools and the skills that they need to make informed choices about their purchasing and consumption decisions. And I was glad that after I was appointed to the Commission, that work concluded. And so Ireland now has its very first national financial literacy strategy. We also did work on a new national payment strategy, and it dealt with an issue that I know is being debated throughout Europe, and that is access to cash. And legislation is now coming through the system in Ireland to make sure that there is an adequate level of access to cash throughout the whole country. And we're at different stages of development of payment systems around the European Union, but I do think that we should protect a certain level of access to cash around the European Union, and that was an important issue that I advanced as well.
Thank you so much. We will continue now discussing all these issues together, and I give you back the floor, Philippe.
Thanks, Isabelle Perignon, for facilitating this fireside chat. Indeed, I invite Commissioner McGrath to stay on stage with us as we're about to engage in a high-level panel on a competitive Europe protecting its consumers. That's a theme that also resonated through the responses during the chat. And for that purpose, I will invite 3 other panel members to join us on stage here, starting with Anna Cavazzini, who is member of the European Parliament for the Group of the Greens and European Free Alliance, where she fights for a sustainable internal market and a fair globalization. And since November 2020, Ms. Cavazzini is chair of IMCO, the Committee of Internal Market and Consumer Protection. Thanks a lot for joining us here. In addition to the perspectives of the European Commission and the Parliament, I also want to hear the voice of the European consumer in our high-level panel. And it's a bit cumbersome in terms of logistics to invite all 450 million EU citizens, but I have good hopes that their common interests will be voiced by Agustin Reyna, who is Director General at BEUC. BEUC, or BEUC, is one of the bigger European consumer organizations, representing no less than 44 independent consumer organizations from 31 European countries. So thanks a lot for joining as well. And since we are, of course, going to talk about competitiveness, we will offer the last chair to Markus Beyer, who is Director General of BusinessEurope. BusinessEurope, I'll have you know, is Europe's largest business organization, representing 42 national business federations from 36 European countries. And Markus Beyer is a warm-blooded advocate for growth and for competitiveness at the EU level. I'm glad to add that in the 90s, he also worked on Austria's accession to the European Union and the integration of Austria in the European single market. So thanks for those services as well. Thank you all for joining our high-level panel. Some of the folks in the room may have missed the hashtag, so I'm glad to repeat it. It's hashtag Consumer Summit in one word. Hashtag Consumer Summit grants you access to the Slido platform if you are registered on the platform. But for the Q&A after our panel, you can also raise your hand. The theme, as also displayed behind me, of this year's summit is shaping together a better future for European consumers, but also for the competitiveness of our European businesses. So, Commissioner, how do you see the relation between consumer policy and competitiveness? How can those two mutually reinforce each other?
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I think they are absolutely mutually reinforcing. And as I said earlier on, I think we should acknowledge that we do face a competitiveness challenge in the European Union. We need to tackle it. It is a top priority of the Commission, and I do see it as being consistent with my mandate and the work of my team to improve consumer protection. Because if consumers have trust in the companies that they are engaging with and that they are purchasing from, I think it creates a better overall commercial environment. If they have trust, I think it also means that they're more likely to support the companies and the sectors that they place a high level of trust in. And I think it can improve the innovation and the productivity of the European economy as well. And I think we do need to listen to businesses, and it's good that they are here and that they are represented, because the issue of e-commerce in particular is one that we're very focused on. When you look at the data, it is really extraordinary, the level of growth. About 4.6 billion small packages imported into the European Union last year. That was almost double the figure in 2023. So it is growing at an extraordinary rate. Our systems were never designed for that level of activity, and that is why the e-commerce communication that the Commission published back in February really sets out the roadmap of what we need to do. And we have to work with the Member States and, of course, with the European Parliament, for example, to get a reform of the Union Customs Code. The biggest reform since 1968 is what we are proposing. And there are some radical measures within that that won't necessarily all be popular among consumers, including around the possible removal of the duty-free threshold of €150. The possible introduction of a handling fee is also one that we suggest could be considered. So there are many issues there that are important, that I think could help to tilt the balance in favour of the competitiveness of the European Union and the competitiveness of the businesses that are working for all of us within the European Union.
That's crystal clear, Commissioner. I hear that consumer policy and competitiveness will mutually reinforce each other under your leadership. Ms. Cavazzini, as IMCO chair, how do you see potential cross-fertilization between consumer policy and competitiveness?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I have to apologize my MEP colleagues because our committee is sitting at the same time in the European Parliament. But nevertheless, of course, we are definitely working on exactly the same topic. I think when I listened to Commissioner's priorities in the first round, I could not agree more. And also the committee, my committee has a lot of the same priorities for this term. I think this is good. I would also agree that in principle, competitiveness and consumer protection go hand in hand. We all know that consumer protection was also kind of invented because of this huge asymmetry between probably bigger corporations and the individual consumers, but also, of course, smaller companies suffer from this asymmetry. And for example, with the last term's Digital Markets Act, that is, of course, helping smaller companies to get into the tech market, it also helps consumers to have a bigger choice. So I think this is a prime example of how competitiveness and consumer protection go hand in hand. I would also say, also for the companies, of course, it is of utmost interest that consumers have trust in their products, and with high consumer protection standards, we can reach this trust and can make sure that consumers, like to buy the product. Of course, competitiveness cannot be misunderstood as deregulation, and then, of course, I can tell a little bit from some of the negotiations that I'm just having in the European Parliament. For example, when we talk about the Green Claims Directive, also I would say one of the cornerstone pieces of legislation to make sure that there's no greenwashing and that also claims are really substantiated. Of course, we see now a huge discussion saying, oh, all the rules are too burdensome and hinder our competitiveness. And so there can also be clashes, and I just want to be crystal clear here that, yes, we need high competitiveness, but of course competitiveness can never be an excuse to lower our standards. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Cavazzini. Mr. Reyna, what I hear from both the Commission and the Parliament, it sounds very promising. The Commission intends to strengthen consumer protection whilst also safeguarding the competitiveness of EU businesses. As Director General of a large consumer organization, do you tend to agree with those perspectives?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I totally agree. Consumer policy is essential for competitiveness at the end of the day, for the very fine reasons that my colleague just explained. But consumer policy is not only essential for well-functioning markets, but particularly in the European Union is important, really important, I would say. This is my first consumer summit, sitting here in the first row, but this is my 16th Consumer Summit. And I remember when I participated as an intern 16 years ago, we were discussing the Consumer Rights Directive, 2010. 2009, sorry. And look how much progress we have seen over the last 15, 16 years in terms of harmonization of consumer rights. We come at the time from discussing only minimum harmonization, maximum harmonization, that's the word that no one could have mentioned, no? And now, today, we have a great level of harmonization, unification of consumer protection across the Union, which is fundamental for a well-functioning single market where companies can operate across the borders seamlessly. So that's why we should not be apologetic about the rules that we have on consumer protection. On the contrary, they have been fundamental to create this level playing field in the European Union.
We should be proud, or prouder.
Absolutely, we should be very proud. We should be very proud from the point of view of a well-functioning single market, but also because we offer the highest possible levels of consumer protection worldwide. This is something to be really proud about. And there are things to adjust and accommodate, streamline, simplify. Yeah, I totally agree. And we will get there. But we don't need to reinvent the wheel because we have a wonderful basis. And like the Commissioner you mentioned, there are many priorities that we are fully aligned and fully agree. I'm going to discuss that more later on. But the reality is that we have a very good basis to work on. And I truly believe that consumer policy will play a fundamental role in making Europe more competitive also worldwide. Thank you.
Mr. Beyer, I come to you with the exact same question, since competitiveness is high on the agenda of our Consumer Summit. I likely need not to convince you that in the current geopolitical context, it is a very high topic indeed. I hear Mr. Reyna saying that we should be very proud of the framework in place to protect consumers. What do you expect from consumer policy as an instrument to also strengthen the competitiveness of European companies and SMEs?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me thank you for inviting us, and I think it's very important. And there's many points of alignment, but I think the starting point is very important to keep in mind. We have an issue. I mean, we have been falling behind in Europe. We have a productivity gap to all our major competitors, and we have been falling behind under all benchmarks. I mean, I don't need to read them out. And I must say it's very important, and I listened very carefully to the Commissioner, that this is acknowledged and that competitiveness is back up on the agenda, because at the end of the day, and we can see it in the context we are playing in, and I just come back from Washington and Ottawa, we will only be as strong as our economy. I mean, this is where our strengths will and can be based upon. So we need to look after this. And I must say, things like justice for growth agenda, this is highly welcome. And I think it's very important to look after these things. And why I'm mentioning this, of course, we are since many years asking our members, why do you not invest in Europe? Why do you invest elsewhere? And of course, the questions beside, of course, high cost of energy, lengthy permitting procedures, and so on, is very often on top of the list is regulatory overburden, which does not mean that regulation is bad per se. And I would also tend to really agree with Agustin. I think harmonization is a very important thing, that we are not having fragmentation within the single market. Of course, I mean, reminds me of some debates I had with your predecessor and with Thierry Breton. Of course, harmonization is only good if the content of a piece of legislation is also manageable. But in principle, and I think this is something where consumer policy has been very much at the forefront to be more harmonized than other pieces of legislation. And I think this is a very important thing. Referring maybe to 2 or 3 other things I've heard, so I think I totally agree on harmonization. On what you said, Agustin, and also the Commissioner, what you said, Michael, is basically enforcement is key. I think many issues we have in Europe are mainly driven by bad implementation and sometimes lack of enforcement. There is pieces where we might need new legislation, like for instance, third-party litigation funding. But in most of the cases, it's really about enforcement. And I think this is something where we agree with BEUC. Christelle is also there. I think Eurocommerce is also on board here, and we are putting our heads together in order to see what we can do. On what Anna said, I mean, TSA, DMA, we have been clear to our American counterparts. I mean, of course, you can imagine the messages we hear. Obviously, we told them, look, there is grievances in many files, also for us. So we will be working on simplifying where it's necessary. But we were also clear that, I mean, we are in favor of level playing field. And this means, I mean, there is no possibility to exclude players in the European market from legislation that is applicable to the European players. I mean, on the green claims, I agree that there should be no greenwashing, which is the, let's say, the starting point of the directive. Don't need to go into all details here, but I think what we also need to avoid is green hushing. So I hear from many companies, from many boards, from many CEOs, I mean, that at the end, I mean, the thing is so burdensome what we have at the table that they will shy away from many things. But I mean, we can discuss it later on. The debate is ongoing. I know we're in the middle of the trilogue, but it needs to be workable.
Thanks a lot for voicing.
Yeah, maybe to ask you, sorry, to answer your main question. Yeah, because it's always important to answer the questions of the moderator. I think this has and very much has to go hand in hand. And I think consumers are allies in driving the recovery, so giving trust to consumers is key. Of course, it needs to work for companies, but competitiveness and consumer protection have to go hand in hand.
Thanks for voicing the concerns of the businesses and for going to such great lengths in answering my questions, Mr. Beyer. As we've just heard from Commissioner McGrath, the Consumer Agenda 2025-2030 will be published by the end of the year. So, Ms. Cavazzini, what do you think is most important to be included in that agenda, and how does that relate to the priorities of IMCO and the European Parliament?
Thank you so much. I think, in principle, I mentioned I agree with the Commissioner's priorities. The Digital Fairness Act, there is still a gap in the online world when it comes to fairness for consumers. People who are getting dragged into staying on the platforms forever because of addictive design. But also, I have to say, indeed, a lot of parents contacting me and saying they are extremely worried about mental health about their children. I think that's one of the main topics right now when I speak to citizens. Influencer marketing, you mentioned it. So I think there is still some gaps in the online world that is developing so fast. And of course, we as lawmakers are always a little bit like 3 steps behind, is my feeling. But nevertheless, that's why it's important that the Commission is pushing this forward. I also agree with the priority of enforcement. And I know with the Commission, with the consumer organizations, also in my committee, actually last plenary session, the Parliament demanded or kindly asked the Commission to come up with a CPC reform in order to have a better European-wide enforcement, especially also when it comes to the e-commerce, and that was your third priority. I think e-commerce is at the moment really one of the biggest topics also in my committee. You can imagine that all the members of the European Parliament, I guess you do it as well, visit customs, visit market surveillance authorities, and everyone is drowning and is saying, okay, we can't just not keep up. We need action. And of course, we are negotiating since 2 years now the customs reform. If we have it on the table or if we have it done, it will definitely help, but it's also more a long-term project. So probably we need here concreter, faster action. And one thing the Commissioner didn't mention as a priority, and probably one topic he mentioned, but where I miss action, is first, the sustainable consumption. I think it was the biggest priority in the last term. I know now competitiveness is a little bit more in fashion, and of course there's reasons for that, but nevertheless we should not neglect sustainable consumptions. We put forward a lot of important files in the last term. Of course we have to implement them. We have to finish the Green Claims Directive, but nevertheless, especially on the e-commerce platforms, when you look at fast fashion. I know France is doing a lot right now. When you look at other products that are skyrocketing, that are absolutely not sustainable, I think we need to have more action on sustainable consumption. And the last point, I liked it very much, the Commissioner mentioned the inflation, the high consumer prices, because indeed this is also, I would say, in the different elections we had in the different member states, one of the core issues. And I know it is really, really difficult to do something from EU level on that, because of often it's financial counter means or whatever, but still thinking a little bit more of how we can counter these high prices on EU level would be important. So talking about shrinkflation, talking about other topics. So probably here I want to have more action from the Commission.
That's loud and clear, and the Commissioner may not have mentioned sustainable consumption, but I see that he took note of your inputs, Ms. Cavazzini. Mr. Beyer, you will read the new consumer agenda through the lens of Business Europe, obviously with a keen interest in measures that support growth and competitiveness for European businesses. So in that view, what should be included in the consumer agenda?
Well, first, I think we had a pretty prolific, let's say, cycle lately. I mean, like in many other files. So I think it's really about consolidating. I think there's a lot of things where we need to see how they work, how they're implemented, and how this can play out. Then, of course, and I think I mentioned it before, I think we have a lot to do in enforcement. I think we have issues where issues around competitiveness are centered in enforcement. The Commission's Justice for Growth strategy, I think, is a good way to deal with it. And this is something where I think together, as I said, with Eurocommerce and BEUC, we are putting our heads together to see what we can do to improve here. I would also agree on what has been said about third country traders. I think it's not appropriate if there is products coming in which do not live up to European safety and other standards. I think there's, of course, again, a big deal of enforcement and how to deal with this, making sure the authorities have the resources they need. And of course, what we call the rogue and the rogue third country traders and marketplaces, I think there is remedies to be done. Also in the sense of what I was saying earlier, there needs to be a level playing field. Where I see a necessity to really come up with a piece of regulation is, of course, third-party litigation funding. I mean, we see that there is a big danger of huge frivolous claims, a danger that will increase with all the pieces of legislation we are currently trying to repair and implement in this order. And insofar, I mean, there needs to be clarity, legal certainty, and don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking for a ban here. What I ask for is clear rules, transparency, and not to end up in a situation where we have big problems. And I think the Commission has made a consultation here. The Commission has made a big report here which showcases the issues. I think we meanwhile have over 300 funders. We also see that this is a clear business model. So, I mean, I can understand the argument of access to justice of consumers, but we can also see, I mean, this is mostly about the claims with, let's say, the highest chance for making a profit, and is driven by different things. So I think this is something where we need clarity and where we'll need to work upon.
You're not asking for a pen, but I think you're asking for an ear, and I have good hopes you'll find one in this panel. Maybe to complete the 360 view, Mr. Reyna, if you were to write the next consumer agenda, how would it read?
Will you let me? No, because then they will start attacking the NGOs and that we are lobbying for the Commission. Absolutely not. Jokes aside. Look, this is a consumer agenda. And as such, we need to focus on what matters to people. What is it that keeps people awake at night at the end of the day? We had yesterday our General Assembly, with our 44 national members, 45 now national members, where we adopted our strategy for the next 5 years. We basically look at what are the priorities of consumers on the ground, what they would like us to advocate for, to inform policymakers about their needs and expectations. And of course, many of the priorities that were already been mentioned: children protection, addictive technologies, unsafe products coming from third country website, but more fundamentally, also the fact that we have a body of laws that needs to deliver on the ground. And that is where I totally agree also with Markus on this. We need to do much better on enforcement, and we need to do much better on enforcement of consumer protection rules. And here comes the role of the CPC regulation, of course, the upcoming, hopefully upcoming review, but also on private enforcement. On the CPC as such, I think there is high times that we have more centralized powers. This is essential not only to protect, ensure that all consumers across the board are protected, equally in certain cases that concern pan-European infringements, but also for the single market and having a level playing field for our companies. We have a very good experience with competition law enforcement. So why we cannot have the same for consumer law? And this, for me, makes total sense also in the context of simplifying things for both companies, consumers, and authorities alike. And then, if you allow me, one point on third-party funding, because, of course, this concerns directly also the implementation of the Representative Actions Directive, which is in the process of being implemented in most of the member states. And I totally understand, Markus, the concerns, for example, around patent trolling and all these sort of practices. But when it comes to consumer litigation, I can tell you on behalf of all my members that are here, none of them are for the business. Is to get the money in the pockets of the consumers as a result of harm that they have suffered. So what I will ask, you and all of you, let's give the Representative Actions Directive a chance first. And if we see there is a need, then we can see whether one needs to be regulated. But we cannot forget that even in relation to the funding of litigation, the Representative Action Directive already includes many, many safeguards in the directive itself. So there I would like to ask for caution, because like we are trying to improve also public enforcement, we also need to get private enforcement of the ground. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Reyna, for this very warm plea. And indeed, on enforcement, we're going to engage in a dedicated panel on that topic, because I think we all agree it is a very hot topic. I took the opportunity of gauging the different stakeholders in this audience this morning, and I think on more centralized powers, we're going to have a very interesting dialogue. Commissioner McGrath, I believe we heard a lot of helpful suggestions to populate the upcoming consumer agenda. So may I ask for your feedback on these different interesting proposals?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lively consultation, which is good, because we want to hear the views of all of the different stakeholders, because this is an important moment, and what we decide before the end of this year will really set the direction of travel for policy over the next number of years. So it is a critical juncture in that respect. I think the issue of fragmentation comes up time and time again, not just in consumer policy, but actually across a whole range of different issues in the single market. And that there are real consequences from fragmentation, including in consumer policy. For example, on the question of enforcement, which we keep coming back to, we have 27 member states with their own respective national authorities, with, if we are to be honest, different capabilities, different levels of resources, and often a different approach. And that doesn't serve the single market well as we seek to achieve consistency and a level of harmonisation of our approach. But also fragmentation needs to be addressed by the Commission taking action and taking initiative. So if we allow fragmentation, for example, in the area of digital regulation for consumers, if the Commission does not bring forward a Digital Fairness Act, we will see what has already begun, which is individual member states bringing in their own national laws to address the gaps that are there in consumer protection legislation in the digital sphere. And that means then for businesses, they have to navigate potentially up to 27 different sets of digital rules when they're engaging with their customers. That's not fit for purpose. That's not where we should be going. And so that helps, I think, us to make the case that there is a need for a European-wide approach when it comes to digital fairness, and that's why we will bring forward a proposal. The other reason, of course, is that while we have a Digital Services Act, its reach into consumer protection and product safety is limited. And there are some actions underway, as you know, both under DSA and under the CPC regulation at a national level. But it doesn't fully address the issues that arise in terms of customers' digital shopping experience, because, of course, the DSA's reach is not absolute in that sense. I think Anna is right about sustainable consumption. I did mention it, but I didn't include it in my first three priorities, which are the consumer agenda and the action plan, enforcement and the Digital Fairness Act, but that does not mean it's not a priority, and it absolutely is. And while some of the files don't fall under my direct portfolio, I'm more than happy to work with the committee and in the other committees that have responsibility and also to lend my full support. And I think you're right to touch on the customer experience at a time of rising prices. People are looking for value for money. And they tell us about shrinkflation, and they tell us about their lived experience, particularly over the last few years. And it's important that we ensure that consumers have all of the information that they need. And I think Agustin is right. We should be very proud of the laws that we have. European consumers are the most protected in the world, and they do have a lot of information when they're making a purchasing decision. But we always have to keep that under review and see where are the evolving challenges, and is there more that we need to do to ensure we can protect consumers but also be fair to European businesses.
That's very clear, Commissioner. Maybe coming back to one of the concerns raised by Mr. Beyer, you've hinted or touched upon this already when you say it's not feasible to talk to 27 different counterparts, but Mr. Beyer was specifically worried about regulatory overburden. If I read your e-communication from February this year, I understand you do have a comprehensive strategy in place to reduce that administrative overburden for our companies.
Yes, we do. I mean, if you read the e-commerce communication, which is very comprehensive, I think you can't but conclude that it is both pro-consumer and pro-business. And I also think that when we bring forward new initiatives like the Digital Fairness Act, it can be both. And we will be looking at that initiative through the lens also of how we can reduce the burden on businesses, where they have to on multiple occasions seek information from consumers. Just to give one example, I think there are areas where we can lessen the burden on companies without diminishing the rights that European consumers have. So it is a balancing act, but it's one that I think we can achieve if we work together. And we do need to listen to each other. It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that each other says. And my portfolio is consumer protection in relation to the topics we have here under discussion today, but also as a member of the College of Commissioners, I also have to make a contribution to improving the competitiveness of the European economy. And that's why, you know, I acknowledge you referencing the Justice for Growth strategy, so looking at issues like digitalisation of justice, looking at the idea of a 28th regime for companies that will help to hopefully bring down barriers in the single market. And the more that we can bring down barriers in the single market, the more benefits there are for consumers, and the less they need to look beyond the single market to meet their needs.
A lot of food for thought already, and I believe that our Consumer Summit is indeed a strong testament of the fact that the Commission is lending an ear, is inviting for inputs and embracing the feedback of all stakeholders involved in consumer policy. I will go around this panel one more time, and then I'd like to open for a short Q&A session where you in the room can raise your hand, and the people who have registered on our platform can use the Slido platform to address any questions or remarks to our panel members. My last question is simple and straightforward. I already heard a lot of consensus, good initiatives and common interest around this table. So what can we do together to translate this vision into action? Commissioner, I propose to start with you.
Well, look, this is a good start today. I think it is about working together because none of us on our own can address all of these challenges that we face. When it comes to legislation, the Commission will propose, and then it's over to the co-legislators in the Parliament and the Member States, and we act as an honest broker, and we try to bring them together and help to encourage compromise and consensus. And then once laws are actually adopted, we oversee the implementation and we ensure enforcement. So I think we have to listen to each other because all of the perspectives that are being shared are valid. I think the wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise in this room is something that we would be very unwise to ignore, because you have exposure to the lived experience of consumers right across the European Union, whether it be through the Consumer Centre or indeed acting as a national authority dealing with individual complaints. And then we have many businesses represented here as well who also are dealing with it from a different perspective, engaging with their consumers on a day-to-day basis. So I think we should invest a lot of time and effort to get the mandate right over the coming months, because that will set the tone for the following few years. Because if a proposal is not in the consumer agenda, the action plan, then its prospects of getting delivered within the mandate of this European Commission and this Parliament are much slimmer.
Thanks a lot, Commissioner. It sounds to me like there's a clear plan in place to translate vision into action. Ms. Cavazzini, I also heard a warm invitation from the Commissioner to the European Parliament to work hand in hand to achieve an ambitious agenda. So what do you expect from the next 5 years to achieve success?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of good ideas that became probably also clear, and I'm sure also you have additional good ideas. So I'm also really looking forward to the outcome of this consumer summit at the end. To my mind, I still have the feeling consumer protection is the area where this sometimes very far seemingly EU, Brussels bubble is connecting really closely to the citizens. I saw it, for example, in the election campaign. Every citizen knew about the common charger or knew about the right to repair. So for me, it is also really a chance to connect to the citizens. And I think someone said it at the beginning, I don't know if it was Niels or you, that also in times where democracy is not a little bit, probably it is in crisis and people are not trusting institutions anymore. The trust in consumer organizations, in consumer law is really very high, and we should also make use of it. So for me, consumer protection has really a very, very important role. Yeah, and strengthening this together with Commission, Parliament, the consumer organizations and the businesses and all of you is, of course, very important, very high on the agenda of my committee. And I can probably also say one last political remark, where in other areas we have now also really a very tough division in the Parliament, a lot of fights. I would also still say that consumer protection is an area of huge consensus in general. Of course, the devil is sometimes in the detail, but in general, there is a lot of consensus also in my committee when it comes to really high consumer standards in the EU, and we continue to fight for those.
Glad to hear that, and thanks a lot, Ms. Cavazzini, for voicing the perspectives of the European Parliament. Ms. Reyna, I heard a very clear vote of confidence in consumer organizations from the European Parliament. So in your view, how can we harness this spirit and turn it into a leverage for European consumers? And in other words, when will you be a happy man in 2030?
I think I will be a happy man, I hope to. The Consumer Summit is probably one of my favorite events of all that are organized in the bubble, not because of a great moderator, but also because of the diversity that we have here. Consumer organizations, academics, the ECCs, national authorities, businesses. And this is the richness that help us to move forward. It's the power of the dialogue that we can have between all of us in order to develop, informed and evidence-based policies. And all this progress that we have been talking about, that we can be really proud of, is also because of this diversity. It's because of having a very strong civil society movement in Europe. A civil society movement that is under attack today. And if we really want to continue moving forward, we need to take care of our civil society movement. We need to take care of our consumer organizations, of the many civil society organizations that are trying to make Europe a good place to live in for all citizens. And I say this because I know, Commissioner, you're going to be in charge also of the civil society strategy. And this is something that now we live in a crucial times, worldwide, and having a strong civil society in Europe will be essential to continue moving forward and having all these very rich debates that we are having here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Reyna. Mr. Beyer, I'll close it with you. Is there anything that you would like to add to this?
Well, no, very briefly. I agree that it's important that we listen to each other and work together. For us, of course, competitiveness and simplification needs to be very much on top of the list. As I totally agree that it needs to go hand in hand with consumer protection. But competitive companies and a successful economy is the starting point. This is where we have missed out in Europe in the last couple of years, and where we need to be more successful in order to achieve our goals. And I think this is more and more understood. Justice for growth is a very good approach. One word on digital fairness. I think we have absolutely no issue, for instance, to find a protection for minors, just to respond to this. I heard the message of the Commission on simplification, so this is welcome. And of course, we will discuss this. But I think it's very important that if we cover a new point, it really needs to be proven gaps, not to create new overburden. So it will need to be precise. But on what I heard, I think there's ample space to discuss. 28th regime is highly welcome. And to finish on one thing, before I've been overseas, I think I've been in 14 capitals in 4 weeks. A lot of things go in the right direction now, but I can tell you it's a hard sell. I mean, it's a hard sell with companies. The belief in that things will really happen, will really go in the right direction is not a given. And I can tell you, I stand up for what is tried to be achieved. Because, I mean, don't be fooled. I mean, out there, we're all put in the same basket. Parliament, Commission representatives, business representatives, BEUC, what have you. I mean, we're the crazy people who produce the things that make it impossible for companies to do their jobs. So we try to be precise on what needs to change, but also to underline that certain things go in the right direction. But on this, and I'll finish on this, it's very important to deliver successfully on Omnibus 1, because this is very much a question of credibility. If we are able to show to the companies that things really go to the right direction, then we can produce a vicious circle, and that's what we want.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Beyer, for your clear and strong statements, and thanks to all of you for sharing your perspectives, your points of view. At this point, I'd like to open it up to our audience for questions and remarks, both in this room and also on Slido. And I see that we do have an intervention from the Economic and Social Committee, so I'll give the word to Sandra Party, who is president of the EESC section for Internal Market.
Thank you very much. So that saves me the time to introduce myself, indeed, representing the European Economic and Social Committee, and thank you very much to the panel for your contributions already. Obviously, in the ESC, we also represent the social partners. We represent civil society organizations, including consumers. We are recently finishing, or we are at the moment working on opinions with regard to the cost of living. So that goes from the quality of public services for consumers and citizens in general, also to the dysfunctionalities of the single market and how they are impacting consumers. For instance, you have territorial supply constraints that make it difficult for companies to sell wares and products in all the EU countries. which reduces obviously consumer choices and might also lead to increased pricing. So that's one of the issues we are looking at. Another one we are looking at currently is indeed also the e-platforms and the third country sellers in the context of e-commerce, where we have a number of very concrete sort of suggestions and ideas, and very much would hope that there is a possibility for forwarding them to you and having you look at them. But what I want to get at is, it was said that we need to do more to protect the consumers, and I would also say to protect SMEs who are producing a lot of the wares. For instance, with much better market surveillance. And there I sort of have the question, why isn't it happening? We do see the negative impact of having products come to our market, not adhering to our standards, undermining the products from our own companies. We are treating our own companies worse than we treat the ones outside the EU. So why isn't it happening? What's stopping? Where are the stumbling blocks to make it feasible, like they're clear for companies that we actually support our own companies here in Europe? Why aren't we helping them? Why isn't there more market surveillance? Why isn't there more checking of what comes in through the ports onto our markets? And maybe also, if putting more and more regulation out there isn't doing the trick. I mean, as you've been saying, over the past 5 years, there has been a lot of new legislation. There has been a lot of reviews of existing consumer protection legislation, but it's not being enforced, it's not being implemented. So doing more of the same is not necessarily getting us to where we want to be. Shouldn't there be a different approach, especially vis-à-vis also national administrations? Thank you.
There's at least the perception that market surveillance is not happening or not working, or enforcement is not effective today. Anyone in this panel who'd like to address that? Mr. Reyna.
There's something about it. It's about the volume. It's about the volume. If you see the amount of parcels that are entering as individual parcels, so we cannot ask the customs to check absolutely everything. And when the consumer buys something, the consumer de facto becomes the importer. So you have the full responsibility. We have a system, a problem in our regulatory framework, so the fact that these platforms are not held accountable. And there are different mechanisms to do this. So it's the question of how we can make the platforms to do their job before the product is being shipped. Because once it's already flying and enters the European in the single market, the problem is there. So we need to prevent that happens in the first place. And a very legitimate question is that if these companies are systematically violating consumer rights and safety standards, do they deserve to enter our markets? And I know this is a very bold statement, but we are living in a very bold world at the moment. So I think that is really a question. It's a question of volume and be able to tackle the issue at the source. And I can tell you, because I have many of my members here, and I'm not exaggerating, every week I receive testing results from my members showing how unsafe these products are. And just to give an example, I don't know if my Danish member is here, last week they sent me a report about waterproof jackets. So bought on these platforms, all non-conforming, full of illegal PFAS. Bought in the shops, not a problem. So there is something there. So, yeah.
I welcome your brutally honest statement. Commissioner, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it gets to the nub of the issue in many respects. I think Augustin is right. I think the volume is extraordinary. 12 million a day. You almost have to say it a few times to really grasp it. And that's new. That's a new scale of challenge that we haven't had before, and it continues to grow. And so the old solutions will not work given that issue. Yes, we are stepping up market surveillance. Yes, we are doing product safety sweeps online, and we will have the outcome of recent sweeps very shortly. Yes, we are doing more product testing. I visited a laboratory here in Belgium some weeks ago. We have the new General Product Safety Regulation. I want to thank the Parliament and the Member States for their support for that. It only came into effect in December of last year. But I do also agree that there's a limit in responding that way without really getting to the root cause of the issue. And that's why it is about engagement and enforcement with the platforms directly. One of the proposals in the reform of the Union Customs Code is that the obligations are shifted onto the platforms, which I think is an important reform. The sooner we get agreement on that from the co-legislators, the better. Also with the Chinese authorities, there has been good cooperation, but I think we need to review it and we need to intensify our efforts to deal with the issue at source within China, including with the manufacturers there. And so I will be visiting there later this year, and I can assure you that these issues will be my top priority. So once the products interface, once they enter or seek to enter Europe, we need to do more at the point of entry. We need to do more in relation to testing and sweeps and enforcement, but we also need to go further back down the supply chain to where it all begins and try and deal with it there as well. And that will be my focus.
And indeed, I acknowledge the volumes are extraordinary. We're talking 12 million parcels per day. It's sometimes a matter of bandwidth. But we do have in the information market, just outside, we do have a booth of the product safety team of DJ Just. And if you were to visit that booth, you can get a better flavor of the types of actions that are being taken already today in order to make sure that we try to prevent unsafe products from entering the European market. Ms. Cavazzini, you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, very quickly, because of course there's probably more questions, but just to reinforce and make it a little bit stronger what Agustin has said. So I think we need to really think more radically. I think we need to bring the individual parcels down. The number is too high. I was just visiting the market surveillance of Baden-Württemberg like 2 weeks ago, and they exactly said what you said. So in times of stationary shops, the system worked, and the unsafe products then were not anymore in the shops, are not anymore in the shops. But in a time when every second then just a different product, it's put back on the platform with a different photo or whatsoever, the system is not working anymore. The system is broken. So we need to bring the number of individual parcels down. When I was at the customs of Rotterdam the other time, they explained me really the difference. The customs can check a huge container, they do like one little check and they know the whole container is in order. But with every individual parcels, they cannot do the same. So we need to bring the number of individual parcels down. This is just a fact, I would say. And then second, very quickly, we tried as Greens in the last term to get more responsibility of the platforms in the product safety, but we could not find a majority in the parliament because I think the problem was not so big. So probably we need to really also think now with all the different other pieces of legislations going on, can we really increase the responsibility for the platforms from third countries, for example, if they continue to put the unsafe products online, that they face some consequences, because at the moment there is just no consequences, so they just continue doing it. And I think here we need to be really more ambitious.
Thanks for that warm plea, Ms. Cavazzini. Commissioner, I'd like to also come back to something that already Sandra Parti asked, and it's a question that also receives a lot of votes on our Slido platform, and I think it touches upon effective enforcement. The question reads, how will a Digital Fairness Act help if we don't enforce the existing laws?
Well, we have to do both. I mean, we have to enforce the existing laws of the European Union. And you know, you've acknowledged the extensive work that my DG is leading and working hand in hand with all of the national authorities, the consumer protection authorities, and also the market surveillance authorities. So that's priority number one, is enforcement of our existing laws, because the scale of the challenge is growing at such a pace that I think Anna's point is a fair one about the practical reality of our authorities in the member states having to deal with that volume every day is incredibly difficult. And so that's why I would encourage everyone to look through the e-commerce communication in February. It is really comprehensive, and there are many work strands within it that we are now focused as a Commission on implementing. They're not all within my DG. A number of other DGs are directly involved because it is a shared responsibility across a number of different areas. But when you read it, you will see the focus on enforcement. And so when it comes to the Digital Fairness Act, which is yet to be proposed, it will be next year before we actually propose a fully developed Digital Fairness Act law. Of course, we have to have at the heart of that enforcement and oversight mechanisms, and those are the very issues that are under consideration right now. And if we get that right, it may also help to deal with some of the problems that are manifesting right now.
Let's see maybe in this room whether there are a couple of questions. We have someone at the second front row here. If you could maybe state your name and affiliation,
Yes.
and then throw it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Eleni Alvritou. I represent the Greek Consumer Association, EKPIZO, Consumer Association, The Quality of Life. We are a long BEUC member, and I would like to underline two things. We have not only material values in Europe, we have also moral values. So, enforcement. What about enforcing moral values of Europeans? We know all here in this room that we are the best protected people worldwide. Do European citizens know that? No. So, what are your plans, Commissioner, for the new agenda to make people understand, feel in their everyday life that they are really protected? What are your plans on how to enhance their trust and restore the vision of the Europe? This is a very important issue, to my opinion, because we have to work on the basis you have to trust civil society organizations that are coming in an everyday basis in contact with citizens. So I think you have to think about it and add it in your plans. Because without making people to know, you have a fertile ground for several theories and reaction and so on. And the other thing I would like to stress is, what about governments? You know better than me that national governments have not the same level of response. Today, I would expect to see some authorities present from Greece. Up to now, I haven't seen anyone. Sorry if there is someone and I didn't understand it. Anyway, they are not following. We have a great range of reactions and response from member states, but we want a higher power, a superpower, to make them obey, to make them enforce European legislation and enforce it at national level. So, what's your limits to impose to national governments to do their job and support consumer associations? It's not only to the Commissioner, my question, it's also to the Mrs. Cavazzini. Also, what are you going to do? We are expecting, we have demands. Thank you.
I hear what you're saying, and at the very least, the Greek delegation seems to have the superpower of invisibility. But I'd like to come to you, Commissioner, because I think the question is applauding the hard work that your DG is already doing, but I'm hearing also a plea for raising awareness and for educating our European civilians on the work that is already being done.
I think that's a very fair point, and people, I think, should be reminded that so much of the legislation, the protections that we enjoy as European consumers has originated in Europe and is implemented then at a local level. And I think there is certainly value in that as part of the consumer agenda and the action plan as well. On the question of trust, I think consumers' trust will improve if their experience is positive. So people's level of trust, I think, is determined by their lived experience. And if they have been burned in a transaction, and if the accountability and the comeback was not what it should be, then they will feel that their trust in the system has been damaged. So again, improving trust comes down to good practice by business and enforcement by the authorities. I do think Anna made an excellent point earlier on about the opportunity that consumer policy affords us to connect with European citizens at a time when people may feel disillusioned about democracy, may feel that there's too much power in Brussels. We need to demonstrate the positive role that we can play in protecting European consumers, because every person in Europe is a consumer. So there's an incredible opportunity, I think, to make the work of the Commission, the Parliament and the Member States relevant in the day-to-day lives of people through improving their customer experience. And that's one that I think we should work on. On the issue of national governments need to afford this issue the level of priority that consumers expect. And that means properly resourcing the competent national authorities, but also supporting the consumer advocacy bodies within each member state. That is important, that they demonstrate that this is a priority by providing the necessary support and the necessary resources. So there is an argument that the interests of consumers needs to be pushed up the agenda in member states at a political level, in addition to the work and to complement the work that we will do here in Brussels.
Thanks, Commissioner. Ms. Cavazzini, the second part of the question was also geared towards you.
I agree with what the Commissioner said, but I think additionally, probably the Commission could sometimes also look a little bit closer if there's really problems that they will be at the end also infringement proceedings. I know it's of course a very the nuclear bomb option a little bit, but I would also say if member states are not implementing EU law, and some of them are not, then of course with dialogue it's important to find out why, but at the end also if there's no action by the national government, then of course there can be at the end also infringement procedures, and I think there should be. I think what is important when it comes to the Brussels side, there is still from the different presidencies, so it's not the Commission, of course, but the different member states' presidency have also the informal consumer summit. But probably I wonder if we should not also make the council format a little bit more, like strengthening the council format to make it a real council, to also take the member states a little bit more on board and put pressure on them to really implement also EU law at the end.
I think I saw a question at the back of the room. So again, if you could state your name and affiliation and give us a crisp and concise question, please.
Good morning. I'm Victoria de Posson, the Secretary General of the European Tech Alliance, and the European Tech Alliance represents European born and bred companies. It means that all my members are from Europe. I was a bit surprised that you kind of sometimes make a shortcut between unsafe product and sustainable consumption directly to e-commerce. And I just kind of want to put out there in the debate that we also have kind of European actors that are trying to support sustainable consumption, whether it's Vinted, Le Bon Coin, Deuxième Main. I'm not there to name all my members, but I kind of want to also say that they are very responsible e-commerce actors and put a bit of colors in the debate. Today, we invest a lot into compliance and make sure that our consumers are protected, and we sometimes feel that our international competitors are not always doing the same. Agustin mentioned to the first question that more accountability is essential, but marketplaces already have a lot of laws when it comes to marketplace liability, whether it's DSA, market surveillance, GPSR. I'm not going to go into naming all of them. The problem is the volume of parcel coming in and the checks at the border. And we heard a lot about the DFA, but that's not part of the DFA. So the customs union is already well advanced, but will we see more on that? That's maybe the first question. We really would like to avoid having one more law that European actors will invest a lot of resources in and comply with, while our international actor will just continue to free ride. So my question is, how can we ensure a tailored and risk-based approach that then guarantee a true level playing field, strengthens European competitiveness, without making sure that European actors that are doing the best to protect consumers and comply with existing laws are not collateral damage, and making sure that all the actors operating in Europe respect European standards, whether they come from the East, the West, or from Europe? Thank you very much.
It's a bit of an elaborate question, but I think it touches upon this tightrope walking between, indeed, protecting consumer rights and also fostering the competitiveness of European business. Mr. Reyna, do you understand what the lady is raising here and how consumers or consumer organizations can respond to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are different elements to unpack there. The question of a level playing field for companies that operate in the EU or sell into the EU, that is fundamental, and that's also what I try to imply in my remark about looking at access to our markets. Now, even if we think of the Digital Services Act, where we have already 2 investigations ongoing, or under the CPC, we have mechanisms there that we can already use. There is, of course, a fundamental question is that we should not start acting once the products are already in the market, because it's extremely difficult to handle the volumes. But making sure that the companies do their job in the first place, and we have indeed some obligations under the DSA. The same will apply under consumer law. But looking at the scale of the problem, that seems to be insufficient. And we need to look also at other pieces of law and other regulatory networks, how they can ensure that all these uncompliant products, at the end of the day, they don't reach the single market, not only for the protection of consumers, but also for the companies that are investing in compliance. Because that is what our results shows as well. European companies invest in compliance. Retailers invest in compliance. So we want to make sure that everybody can play by the same rules. And then you also imply on the question of the Digital Fairness Act, which is indeed is about also closing the loophole that we have in our regulatory framework. So we take the case of the DSA. The DSA includes many obligations for online platforms, but only for intermediaries. But some of these online platforms are also sellers themselves. And for these activities, they are not covered by the DSA. So we need to make sure that we have a system in place that is coherent and consistent. And for me, that is a wonderful example of simplification at the end of the day. Because what we want to make sure is that all the companies know what their obligations are at the end of the day to make sure that consumers are protected. And that's what I see for me, the Digital Fairness Act, like the CPC review. I can be 2 examples of simplification of EU law by streamlining the regulatory framework both for digital consumer protection and enforcement.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Reyna. Mr. Beyer, we acknowledge here that part of the problem is, say, the staggering volumes of parcels entering EU markets, 12 million parcels a day. Ms. Cavazzini even suggesting that we should limit the amount of parcels entering our markets. Would you tend to agree with that statement?
Well, I mean, first, as I said, we are putting our heads together to see how we can do better on this. Where we totally agree is we must not have parcels coming in with products which are unsafe. I mean, I'm grateful to the colleague to underline there's a lot of European companies investing a lot into compliance. And I think I've been very clear that what we want is a level playing field. There's a lot, of course, in enforcement, and we will need to make sure, and of course I hear the message on the quantity, but I think we'll need to make sure that the authorities have the means to do the controls we need to deal with the issue. The other aspect I wanted to raise is, I mean, we're talking a lot to our American friends at the time being. We also talk a lot to the Chinese. And I'm not naive. I mean, I don't think that, let's say, they will rapidly become a like-minded partner, but there might be scope to go a bit deeper on one or the other issue, because there is a bit more openness to talk about things which have been difficult to talk about. So maybe let's use the opportunity to get one or the other effort also from their side, because there seems to be more readiness to do steps. I mean, how far we go, we will see. but I think it's a good moment to address the issues. But at the end of the day, really enforcement, make sure the authorities have the means, and we are ready to cooperate with our friends, not only BEUC and the Commission, of course, but also Eurocommerce, to make sure that we really improve the situation here.
I'll let you chime in now.
Yeah, look, I can be brief. I think it's a good point, and we have acknowledged there are many fantastic European companies engaging in e-commerce, and many of them focusing on e-commerce, and companies that treat their customers fairly and comply with the law need have no fear in relation to any initiative that the Commission will take or will propose. And I think it's important we underline that point. Agustin, I think, has made an excellent point by way of example of the existing gap that is there. So under the DSA, if a very large online platform that operates a marketplace sells a particular product, it's within the scope of the DSA. But if another strand of their business as an e-commerce retailer sells the same product, then the DSA provisions in respect of consumer protection matters do not apply. So there are clear issues there that we do need to address, and I think we can do it in a manner that also provides benefits of simplification and harmonisation. And we don't want the choice to be for e-commerce retailers in Europe, and indeed those outside, to face one properly calibrated, carefully designed Digital Fairness Act, or 27 different national initiatives by means of legislation in each member state to protect consumers online, because that could be what develops as the choice. And I think I know what is in the interests of European businesses. It's the former and not the latter.
I'd like to go to our most voted questions on Slido, because they do represent the greater common denominators in our audience. I see that Agustin Reyna is alive and kicking in our panel, yet one of the questions reads that in a lot of countries the consumer organizations are vulnerable, are struggling to survive, so what can we do to reinforce, to strengthen their internal capacity?
Look, that's my daily bread, basically, trying to help and support national consumers organizations as much as possible, because my legitimacy to stand here or to visit here, comes from my members. They are the ones that are in daily contact with consumers, and many of them, they are also struggling at a national level. There is a question of funding. It's a question also of reinventing the consumer organizations themselves. I'm very optimistic. I'm generally an optimistic person, but I think there is a lot of potential for consumer organizations, because they are the ones that can not only advocate for better standards, but provide extremely important services and advice to consumers. What is essential is that also national governments, they see consumer organizations as partners. They see consumer organizations and those civil society groups that are there to support their citizens. And that is where I think we need to do much more. Perhaps the civil society dialogue will be also an opportunity to do that, but let's not forget that these organizations have been around for decades and have helped to improve consumer conditions, not only at the European level, but also at national level, because they are the ones that are in the front.
We have a couple of minutes left on our clock. I'll take two more questions from the Slido. One of the popular questions, Commissioner, is inviting for a sneak preview on the Digital Fairness Act. Will this be a regulation, a directive, or will it take another form? Can you already disclose?
To be decided.
To be decided. That's crystal clear, a diplomatic answer here today. I could take one more question from the audience. Ms. Delberge, provided it's a short and brief question.
Thank you. I'll make it short. Christelle Hedberg, Director General for Eurocommerce, the European Association for Retail and Wholesale. Fascinating discussion today. Situation from retail and wholesale perspective, there's a huge cost of living crisis. Consumers are buying for the cheapest options, and sometimes this is offered by third country platforms. They're importing direct. The price gap in terms of compliance is estimated about 40% of the price. So what can we do to make sure that our retailers and wholesalers, our retailers based in Europe, remain competitive when you have such a price differential? Thank you.
Anyone who would like to tackle the question from Christel Delberge?
I think the answer is that the rules have to apply to everyone. And while at the moment they do apply in law to everyone, where we are falling down is because of the explosion in the volume that has been spoken about a number of times, the application of the law and the implementation and enforcement is very challenging. And that's the reality. And we need to make sure that that deficit is not at the expense of compliant European businesses, and we owe them an obligation in the same way that we owe European consumers an obligation to fully implement and enforce European consumer protection law. And we cannot say it often enough. It doesn't matter where the product comes from or how it is sold. If it's coming into the European Union, it must comply with our product safety standards, and the vendor must comply with consumer protection laws in the European Union. And we need to do better at enforcing the existing law. Otherwise, European businesses will find it increasingly difficult to compete, because I think you make a really good point. People are searching, they're yearning for value for money at a time when many are struggling to make ends meet. That is a reality, and we have to acknowledge that and not blame consumers. And yes, we have to place the emphasis on sustainability and sustainable consumption, but if they really need a product, and if they're short of money, they're going to go for the cheapest product that gets to them in the shortest period of time. So we have to enforce our existing laws much more rigorously.
We have 2 minutes left on our clock. I see that you all signal to chime in, so I'll go around the panel one more time on this question, and also maybe on one of the highest voted questions that Ms. Cavazzini said that competition or competitiveness can never be an excuse to lower our standards, but how can we remain competitive if third countries do not share that point of view? I think this touches upon the very heart of our high-level panel, so I can grant all three of you, say, 50 seconds to address that question.
Yes, and then I have to really run because I have to be in the parliament again in my committee. But yeah, I think the competitiveness question, I think we discussed really extensively on the panel. Of course, it's about enforcement and the same standards also for imports. How we do it, we discussed a little bit, but again, we need more action. I agree with the question, I would say, with the intention of the question. On the retail, I think at the end, and this is what we discussed a little bit at the beginning, a lot of member states put forward also consumer incentives for, different, when it comes to energy, but also probably when it comes to e-mobility. And I think it is still an important instrument when there is really a crisis. Of course, it should not be there forever. When it comes to the consumer patterns, I have also different figures. For example, we just had a study in Germany that the fair trade products are at the highest rate ever. So I think it's not entirely true that all the consumers always want the cheapest. Consumers also want good products. They want to have also no forced labor, no child labor in their products. And I think that's why also we put forward important legislation in this regard, and again, need to strengthen also the sustainability agenda is my firm belief. But of course, as the Commissioner said, enforcement.
Mr. Reyna, Ms. Cavazzini needs to chair a committee in a couple of minutes. I'm acutely aware that the Commissioner needs to resort to the VIP room for some other duties in also a couple of minutes. So maybe briefly your wrap-up.
Super brief. On the cost of living, totally agree, but something that we need to acknowledge is that no single consumer, if they will know that a product that you buy online could suffocate your kid, will buy that. Consumers simply do not know. They take for granted that when you buy something on a website that is on your own language, that is going to be safe. Just to start with. And very, very briefly on the barriers, and something that you mentioned, we need to look at where are the barriers. And many of these barriers are at national level. We need to acknowledge that. If we think about the capital markets, we don't have a capital markets in the European Union because of national barriers at the end of the day. So I think when we look at simplification, they also look at what is happening at national level.
Mr. Beyer, the last minute for you.
First, fully agree on the national barriers. When we talk about infringement, this needs also to go for a single market, but this is a debate on its own. Secondly, becoming stronger, simplification, reduction of regulatory burden, making permitting procedures more rapidly. But let me finalize on something we've not discussed. I think cost of living crisis, why do we have it? Because we have inflation. Where does the inflation come from? Putin's war in Russia and the asymmetric shock we had on the cost of energy. So something we've not discussed, and in my membership, the big issue why companies don't invest in Europe also is the cost of energy. So there is some first steps in the Clean Industrial Deal, but I think we'll need to do more to fix the cost of energy problem in order to make sure to get the inflation in hand in the long term, in order to make sure that the pressure on people to buy things they normally would not buy is diminishing. And this is important for the business and the economy, but it's also important for the consumers.
In light of timing, we need to wrap it up here, so I propose to release Commissioner McGrath and my other panel members, Ms. Anna Cavazzini, Agustin Reyna, and Markus Beyer, with a warm round of applause.